Welcome to Help the Helpers. And this morning we have Rosa with us. It's such a pleasure. And we're all just coming, some of us with our morning coffee and some with our evening whatever. And and we have a wonderful conversation in store for us that Rosa is going to facilitate. I wanted to say that Rosa was in our community empowerment project and added so much to our group. And we started so many conversations that we didn't get a chance to finish. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that we'll all have this morning. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Rosa.
Thanks so much, Lynn. It's such a pleasure to be here. I just want to say I had such a lovely time at Charles's presentation last week. I was just
Me
so very,
too.
very happy to be here for that. Um, yeah, so where to start? I started by reading the beautiful little purpose statement of Lynn's Help the Helper group that she's been doing for quite some time now. And she writes about how the purpose of this group, and purposes is super important in my book, is to empower, hearten, and encourage therapists, counselors, teachers, and helpers of all kinds to meet the profound challenges of this time. And that's such a beautiful intention. And it goes on to say how focusing can nurture, inspire, and steady us so that we can be there for others. And that's really what some of the things that I want to share today are things that empower and hearten and encourage me in the face of the major social challenges that we're facing. Um, so to begin with, I want to just say a few things about that were in the written description, because those are some of the things that inspire and encourage me. And then we'll open it up to a conversation, and then we'll have the usual breakout groups and close with the poem. Does that make sense to everyone? Does that? Yeah. Yeah. So I, 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 I'm going to talk about something that I think is very connected. The way in which it connects with focusing, it connects with focusing in a lot of ways, but one of the main ways is about the focusing attitude, right? And then the other way is about listening and empathic reflection. And I'm really curious about how those elements can be really useful out in the world, even when people don't know focusing and don't know the steps and don't know felt sense and etc. So that's what I'm going to be talking about most, right? Is the things that inspire me are ways in which these things that we know so well can be really useful and helpful, even in situations where people don't know focusing. So that's not to say that, of course it's useful to learn more about focusing and to dive deep into focusing and all that. But I don't think focusing is a prerequisite for making social change, which is really good because then we'd have to turn everybody in the world to focusers, and that might take some time. We kind of need to make some changes before then. So that's a little bit of the larger frame. So, for example, one of the things that I mentioned is deep canvassing. So, before talking about deep canvassing and talking about which has to do with influencing people, another part of the basic frame that I want to offer is that I identify as a transpartisan progressive green. And what that means, being transpartisan means that I'm not pretending that I don't have any partisan beliefs. It just means that having deep, authentic dialogue with people with different beliefs is as important to me as the beliefs that I have, right? So, one of the people that I learned a lot before deep canvassing, even, there's a gentleman named Dr. David Campt, who I met as part of a professional association that I belong to called the National Association for Dialogue and Deliberation. And David had put an announcement on the email list for that group saying that this was years ago, he was developing this dialogue and empathy-based attempt process for helping people who identify as white or European American or light-skinned have productive conversations with the members of their family or their friends who are what he calls racism skeptics, basically who don't believe that racism is an issue for people of color anymore these days, because that's a problem that was solved a long time ago, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, you are probably are familiar with the narrative. And so right now I'm not trying to judge who's right and who's wrong. At the same time, I was pretty blown away. I was like, whoa, David, what do you mean you work with empathy and listening to train people in how to help their friends and loved ones have more open-minded perspectives? I thought dialogue and empathy, like you weren't allowed to try and influence anybody, right? And he said, well, come to a workshop of mine and you might understand more. And I said, okay. But I was so interested that I ended up organizing a workshop for him where I was living in because I really wanted to experience this and to understand more. And so basically what I realized from attending his workshop is that of course, if we're trying to ethically influence somebody, we need to be open to being ethically influenced ourselves, right? Because we're listening to that person. And so maybe listening to that person will cause something inside of us to shift. And then we're listening to that person, and then we're asking, and then we're reflecting back to show our understanding. And then we're saying, okay, so can I share a story with you? And then we're sharing one of our stories. And so it's a mutual process. And I'm not going to go into the details of it. And there are details. Is one of the things is that it requires in-depth training, just like focusing does, right? And just like training for nonviolent civil action does. Like you just don't go out in the street and decide one day you're going to be a nonviolent protester and that's it. Like you go to trainings, there's things that you need to do, there's things you need to practice. Well, anyway, so Dr. David Campt was a very inspiring example to me because there is so much prejudice and bias and disrespect in our world. And I really don't believe we can help people change by blaming and shaming them, especially if what we don't like is how they're blaming and shaming other people, right? So how to step out of that tit for tat in a productive way is something that I'm really drawn to. A similar process is the work of deep canvassing, right? Where I'm just curious to see a show of hands. Who here has heard of deep canvassing before? Okay. So deep canvassing is a form of canvassing where people go door to door, but instead of just dropping a little leaflet or a flyer, and it was started in Los Angeles by a gentleman who had a LGBTQ support and advocacy and resources center. And my apologies, I'm not recalling his name right now, but I can look it up and send it in later. They got very curious because there had been a transgender rights thing that had just lost. And they had had a lot of success earlier with gay marriage proposal. And so they were really curious to learn. And so they went door to door initially just to find out what people's beliefs were about this. And based on what they learned, they ended up designing this whole process where they go door to door, they ask questions, to listen to people, to hear their stories, to understand their stories. They reflect back. And then they in turn share a personal anecdote of theirs, like a true one. The reason I'm concerned about this issue is because I have a friend who is transgender, and this is the kind of discrimination that they've experienced, et cetera. And since they've listened first, usually the person is willing to listen to them. And what's fascinating about this is that there's been some social scientists who've done follow-up research on this. And it's not like it works every time, right? But 1 out of 10 people that they have a 10-minute conversation with will have a real profound shift. They'll realize, oh my God, I just realized all the stuff I told you before, I've never actually met a trans person. And now you're telling me that you're trans, And the most significant thing is that this shift lasts for 6 months later when they go back and do follow-up studies. And that's pretty amazing to me, how a empathic, deep listening encounter, and 1 out of 10 might not sound very much, but sometimes, it ends up being enough votes to make a difference. Not that voting is the only form of democracy, and that's a whole other, presentation we could get into. Um, but yeah, listening and empathy do make a real difference. And so the third thing that I wrote about, so I had also written a little bit about studies of deradicalization. Now, deradicalization is a funny word because when I was a kid, I thought being radical is really cool, right? But what deradicalization means in a certain context is people who are part of groups that believe in using violence to achieve their ends, and um, and whose ideologies are ones where only certain people are okay and a lot of other people are blamed and scapegoated about being the source of the problem, like the white power movement. And skinheads who are will go out and beat up people for being of a different race, et cetera. And in accounts of how people who have been in these movements have found their way out of these movements, it's so striking, this commonality of somebody who was willing to deal with them as a human being and to trust that there was a seed of goodness in there and to treat them respectfully, even though they disagreed very strongly with this person's beliefs, right? And chosen identity. So those stories I've found really interesting and moving, and I have a collection of them, which I can, a small collection of them, but of really in-depth documentation about them that I can share with people. But then the third one, and I just want to say this briefly before opening it up, is the 20 years of research on deliberative minipublics. This is a democratic innovation where people, it's like a jury almost, people are chosen through a lottery process, and it's intentionally designed to be a very diverse group of people so that it reflects the larger diversity of the larger whole. And then it's a facilitated process, and the purpose of the group is they're brought together to come up with a policy recommendation in a particular policy area, a particular policy recommendation that is in the service of the common good. And I did my dissertation on one particular make and model of these processes in Austria that happens to use dynamic facilitation as their operating system. But since then, I've kind of backed up a little bit to eagle's eye view and realized that there's been 20 years of these deliberative minipublics all around the world, different shapes, different sizes, different models, different facilitation formats, different methodologies. And yet the overwhelming finding in just about every case is that when people are invited to be part of a group in which each person is treated with respect and each person is heard, and they're working on what political scientists call collective action problems, like, political things, that not only is the group able to come up with a shared consensus outcome recommendation, but they find the process very meaningful as well. And they actually have enjoyed this process of working hard on coming up with common ground on an issue of public concern. I don't know about you, but to me, that is so heartening and encouraging to know this about human beings, right? Is kind of like, when Carl Rogers did that research about what makes for therapeutic change. And it's like finding those common factors that if people are in a positive relationship with a therapist where they are feeling seen and heard and respected, there's that inherent process of development in human beings that helps them grow, right? This is, to me, it's a similar thing, except it's at a group level. It's like we can offer groups the basic conditions in which they can work on hard stuff and find common ground and actually enjoy the process. So it says something about human nature, right? The same way that Carl Rogers' basic assumptions about what it takes for people to learn and grow did, right? They kind of grounded us in this sense that there's always a seed of good in human beings, and it might be buried pretty deeply, but there is that ability to grow. Well, likewise in groups. So I think I'll end with that. I'm sure that there's other perspectives and questions and concerns and whatever, but I just really want to open it up.
So now we want to hear from you. That was fascinating, Rosa. These different ways of implementing real dialogue connection. What were your thoughts when you were listening to Rosa?
I'm saying, well, and one thing here that a common denominator seems to be listening. The ability to listen non-judgmentally, just to hear what's in the heart of the other person, and what that they're not dismissed. They're not, like, even if I disagree with, say, a skinhead, there's still a person there, right? And as a person with feelings, as a person with needs. And if I'm able to hear what that is going on there, listen past some of the not pleasant, not pleasant to me anyway, ideas, I can connect to that person. And that doesn't mean agreement right away, right? Doesn't necessarily mean agreement, but it means that we're connecting in some important way. And that's very powerful and transformative. That's what I'm hearing from what you're saying, what you're sharing with us. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Charles. Can I add a little small something in response to that? I'm super grateful about what you said, because sometimes what people say is, oh, but if I just listen and listen and listen, they're not going to change. And I just want to be really clear that we're not talking about one-way listening, right? We're talking about a situation, starting with Dr. David Camp's model, but also in the deep canvassing and also in these groups where and also empathy circles. Empathy circles is a great model for this. It's like the overarching framework we're setting up is, I'm happy to listen to you for X period of time, and then I am going to ask if you would be willing to listen to me. So we're talking about a mutuality in listening, not just squishing ourselves down and just being in here for forever. In these kinds of contexts, it's not like we're a therapist and we're being paid to not share anything for the whole hour, but just listen to them, right? It's very different in that one sense that we listen to everything you said, Charles, authentically, without judgment, reaching for the human being. And then we say, wow, we find something we can empathize or connect with. Like, yeah, I didn't like it either when I was beaten up as a kid at school, because as it turns out, most bullies actually were beaten as kids. It doesn't mean everybody beaten as kids ends up a bully, but most bullies weren't beaten as kids. So if they've just told you how you got to be strong, because if you're not strong, then people will beat up on you, you might be able to empathize, say, yeah, I don't like it when people beat up on me either. And I really want to find ways of protecting myself. Yeah. And now can I share with you a little bit of a story about whatever the topic is, right? But then we need to also make sure we don't start to think that now we're going to convert them with our story, right? Like they shared a little bit of a story and we share a small story. And what David Camp says is that success means if at the end of a conversation, both people have been heard about something, not about everything, about something, and both people are willing to have another conversation. Because it's going to take many, many, many such conversations to end up having an ethical influence on someone else.
Yeah, well, can I respond to that, Rosa? Because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's very important. Um, First of all, if you go with the agenda that you're going to change the other person, uh, that already sets up a way in which you're trying to change them and make them different. You're not really being open to hearing them, in my opinion. I Some people say, well, why do we persuade MAGA people not to be MAGA people? Well, I say first go in to see why they're MAGA people. There's one thing that Gene once said that really liked. He said, you can't agree with something you don't agree with, but you can be curious about how the other person got to think the way they think. You can be
Beautiful.
interested in learning more about how they got to their beliefs. Other thing is, I want to emphasize, and this comes from nonviolent communication. Sometimes people think that nonviolent communication is only about empathy. It actually has two pillars: honesty and empathy. And and so we listen, but we're also honest about how we feel and what we think, not in a way that judges the other person, but we're communicating from our heart what's real for us. So that there's an honesty that develops, or a genuineness. The goal really is genuineness, not just. That's one of my favorite concepts is the idea that if we're giving empathy, and we need empathy, we're kind of giving empathy from hell. And that's not a very good place to be giving empathy. We need to know that we're also being heard and empathized with if we're going to be able to give it. So that just a follow up on.
Yeah.
I very much like what you said, and yeah.
Likewise, Charles, thank you so much for adding more nuance.
Thanks,
Alistair,
Ted. Oh,
Hmm.
oops.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I mean the processes that you describe, I feel hopeful, hearing about them and I'm also curious about how resilient they are, because there's always going to be interest, whether they're business interests or political interests, that end up uh, trying to stop these processes. Maybe deliberately, or maybe just something like social media. They just want people to click and click and click and engage in superficial conversations. Uh, how does how resilient are these processes to that sort of thing?
Alistair, that's a really wonderful question. I want to first reflect it back to make sure I've understood it. Is that okay?
Yes.
So you're asking how resilient are these processes to people that really want to stop them,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And you said something about social media just kind of encouraging people to just click and click. I just want to say, this is my own ignorance. I don't know of any kind of process on social media that could be used. Well, although there is a story about a woman who was a member of the Westboro Church who got de-radicalized through somebody expressing curiosity
Mhm.
and not flaming her online through social media. So I take it back. It may be possible to do some of this stuff on social media, but that's not expertise. Okay. But in terms of resilience, I think we can use these processes one-on-one. However, at some point, one of the things that authoritarian governments have a tendency to outlaw is gatherings of more than X number of people. So I don't know how resilient it would be to have, say, deliberative mini public if all of a sudden, it was against the law to hold them. I think it's like when people talk about nonviolence, how the usual question that people are thrown is, well, what would you do if somebody broke into your house and was raping your wife? How would you deal with it nonviolently? And the response usually is, well, you need to start a long time before then in order to help create the conditions where that's not likely to happen, right? So I think the best time to work with empathy and deliberative innovations and all of this stuff is earlier on, because the more and more authoritarianism there is, the harder and harder it does get. I do think that there are growing numbers of people who are beginning to regret having voted for what looks to be becoming more and more authoritarian government right now. And so I think while I want to respect everyone's opinion in terms of there are people who may still feel very good about their vote and who may be thinking that we just need to wait and see, and that's fine. I think that those of us who are transpartisan, progressive, whatever, need to be thinking really long and hard about how do we create welcoming opportunities for people who may have had very different beliefs and yet now may be reconsidering, right? So that's one place where all of this empathy and listening work is really important. Yes, Lynn.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about being non-judgmental and listening, and that's a prerequisite, but that's the whole thing in a way. And it's so difficult because it has to start with our own attitudes and our own ability to know that we don't know. I grew up or very young went to a fundamentalist evangelical church in which we were wanting to convert people. And the whole feeling of that was that we know and the others don't know. And we have that same kind of attitude now, I think, on all sides. It's like, well, we know the truth and they don't know. And there's something wrong with them. And I'm going to be magnanimous and listen to them, even though I know that, there's something really wrong about their way of being. And I think that working with ourselves and our own ability to not know is very much what focusing gives us. That edge of awareness, of recognizing that any forward movement, any truth is right on that brink of the not knowing, and to connect with people in a way that says, well, I don't really know about this. Tell me about this. Is an attitude shift that we have to work on within ourselves first. It's not just what we say, it's where we're coming from.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. I think it's really important to work with our own attitudes, and something that at the same time, if we're going to be authentic, it's like, I don't think it works to pretend that we don't feel strongly about something when we do, right? So, but how do we create more of an open mind inside of ourselves? For instance, I really, really find it very helpful to always consider what is the grain of truth in what somebody is saying, whom I might really disagree with, right? So for instance, during COVID, the vaccine, there was a rumor going around that the COVID vaccines were actually implanting a chip in you, right? Now, what was the grain of truth to that? Well, it turns out Bill Gates actually has been doing a lot of research, not with COVID vaccines, but in Africa, creating subdermal vaccine trackers that help track whether a person has had their immunizations against measles or their immunizations against, I mean, this was from a science magazine, right? It's like, now taking that little bit of thing that's happening over there and then saying, oh, well, that's what's happening in terms of the COVID vaccines. That's where the grain of truth gets stretched, gets twisted, etc. But at the same time, I found it really helpful to think, okay, these people aren't just crazy. They saw this, they made a connection, right? So another similar example, I'm in Germany right now. I'm here on a research fellowship. Well, the current vice president of the United States came over here and met with the head of the far right party, which many people in Germany took a lot of offense to, as did I. But one of the things he said, and I may not agree with 90% of what this person says, but one of the things that he said is excluding these people that you don't agree with is not helping. It's actually making it grow. Well, that is an actual truth. It doesn't matter who said it, right? And so I think that that's just an example of how I find it personally helpful to look for that grain of truth in what somebody is saying, even when I may not agree with most of it, as it helps create that human bridge.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a little note there that focusing trains us also not to just listen to the to the facts or the story, but to listen to the feeling place underneath it. And that is very, very important. Even if the person doesn't know focusing, people know about listening to the underneath message, to the feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, BJ.
Hey, everybody. First, thank you, Rosa. It's always great to see you. If it's okay with you guys and Alistair, I was so taken with your question about resilience. And I was thinking of resilience at the personal level and then resilience at the group level. And resilience means so many things. Would you say more about what that's about for you? That question of resilience.
Ah, well, I guess partly it's because I come from a troubleshooting mindset, and so I'm always, well, not always, but uh, sometimes trying to look at not just, oh, here's this wonderful thing, and I just hope that we see more of it, but also looking at what are the weaknesses, and uh, and yeah, and hopefully, if we do think about the weaknesses, of something, then we can help to prevent the worst damage, yeah, that's sort of where it's coming from. And yeah, I mean, one thing that I don't particularly like in politics is uh, when people when we just uh, content ourselves with saying, "Oh, what the other person is doing is having a terrible effect," and that's it, But or um, I don't know, or just look at how powerful they are, and how many things they're doing to wreck democracy or wreck something or wreck the environment. It might be true, and but can we do something about it? Let's look at ways to prevent that harm. And that's sort of what I'm trying to get at. Does that answer your question?
Well, first, yeah, I heard you say that I'm speaking from this mindset of problem solving.
Mhm.
And then I heard you say to think far enough down the road to
Mhm.
prevent
Mhm.
things. And that's kind of what I heard Rosa in her answer. She was saying, go back further
Mhm.
and imagine. So I
Uh-huh.
think I heard you saying the same thing.
Uh-huh.
I just so appreciate the word resilience, even as it comes to me as a focuser, that I have to build my own resources. I have to, if you want to do whole body focusing, come to the strength in me here now. All those kinds of things kind of prevent the damage to us personally. And I'm very interested, Alistair, in what you're saying about, so then how do we prevent damage at a systemic level? Or, and Rosa, I'd love to hear you say, you know, um, I was excited to see you coming because you were speaking about organizations. And so, how at uh, an organizational level, even if it's one of these smaller groups you're talking about, how at an organizational level do we build resilience? And I'm done.
I
So
was muted. Thank you so much, BJ. It was so good to see you. Annette has her hand up, and then Charles.
Charles was first.
Oh, I didn't see it. Go for it, Charles.
You probably called on Annette because I'd already spoken. But in any case, very briefly, I was thinking, responding to what you were saying about what people say, well, what if somebody breaks into your house or is it? And I was always struck by something that Marshall Rosenberg said. He said, if somebody's beating their wife or their child, you don't practice nonviolent communication. You call the police. Once the person's been taken someplace where they're not threatening anybody, then you can sit down and talk to them. Oh, what need were you trying to meet by beating your wife and son? Is there another way that you might more effectively meet that need? We have a little conversation, but not while you're beating your wife. Then that we stop. So you can also start earlier, but maybe if you haven't started earlier, sometimes we have to use what he called the protective use of force. Occasionally, that's necessary. Anyway.
Thank you, Charles. Very important point. Yes, Annette.
My question is, what, if any, insights you might have for focusing practice from this work at the community level? Because things are like fractals. So when you bring it back to a dyad and focusing, does it change how one might relate, for example, and share? Like I've been reading Janet Klein's work recently, and like the empathic sharing that happens in that practice. So any thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting question. I don't have any thoughts about how to improve focusing. I think focusing is amazing, wonderful, takes lots of different forms. There's lots of different innovations and creativity within it. I did have an invitation to all of you, which was just curious about noticing when you're in a group context, small group context, any kind of context, and people aren't necessarily focusers, what are the things that work reasonably well, and what are the things that don't work so well? So, for example, one of the things that I've seen work pretty well in small groups is let's have a circle go round, right? Each person will have a chance to speak. And what happens is that when we know we're not going to be interrupted, I find that people, even when they're not focusers, will have a tendency to sink a little deeper, or they might be able to say, well, actually, I want to say this other thing, because not until they pass the talking piece is it going to be the next person's turn, right? I believe Kathy McGuire did some really interesting work on this decades ago in her dissertation about how so many meetings can be improved if people will simply create some kind of format where people aren't interrupting one another and where everybody is being given a chance to speak. So I think there's lots and lots of little things that are very focusing friendly that are already happening and or that we can support to help group encounters go better, even when we're not teaching everybody how to do focusing. So that's kind of the direction I'm more thinking about, like how can we support and encourage group contexts? It's still a great question. I'll have to think about it later. Thank you.
I love what you're saying, Rosa, and I just wanted to go back a bit, but let's not lose that piece that you're talking about. In dyads, focusing dyads, I think it would be wonderful if we really paid attention to the resilience of the dyad, especially ongoing focusing partnerships. And one way I think is that we pay attention to the places where we aren't quite meeting or matching, and we learn how in a focusing way to say that, because we are polite and we go along with, and then we say, oh, I'm not going to focus with that person again because they interrupt too much, or they whatever. And that, I think that training to pick up on implicit what would we call it, conflict, but sort of not meeting, and knowing how to say those things, that resilience really comes there. And we don't pay attention to that. We don't pay attention to the relationship really of the focusing partners. We just have them listen to us, and we don't talk about the you and me of it.
Ooh, that's so lovely, Lynn. So how can we work with our focusing relationships as a practice ground for exploring ways to be more authentic in kind yet courageous ways, is what I'm hearing you say. Is that close?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in a way, it's like sex, that people that can't talk about what they like and what they don't like and what their partner is doing that doesn't do it for them, it gets worse and worse. And if you learn to be able to communicate in a way that the other person can really hear you and feel appreciated, even though there's something that they're doing that you don't like, that makes all the difference.
Mm.
Lynn and Rosa, I'm going to jump in and say Ann Weiser Cornell's training does that first step so well, because she makes you practice. How do you, as the focuser, take charge and say, this is what I need. That is not what I need. And I always wondered, and it's great. It's like go out and make 10 people say no to you. It's hard to get people to say no to you. But anyway, what I didn't hear in her training was how do we, as the listener, then uh, facilitate the focuser taking charge, asking for what they need. And somebody taught some of us this phrase to say, so you'll let me know if you want me to reflect, or you'll let me know. And it's a beautiful response, to the focuser. Whoever taught some of us that it's a good next step. The focuser does this, the listener can then do this.
Thank you so much, BJ. Liz, you've had your hand up. Would you like to share something?
Yeah, I'm a little troubled by the asymmetry that's implied in that relationship of trying to change somebody's mind. And I was thinking, as you said, that we have to remember that there's a grain of truth. I think of it as much larger than a grain. And it's much more understandable to me why people think in that way that you're trying to change. And I don't know, they're being offered something, and I don't know what, I mean, I'm doing this this implication that we are of the same mind here. I don't know what we have to offer them in return. I mean, if you to be simplistic about it, there's kind of a difference between voting for Hillary Clinton and voting for Bernie Sanders. It's a difference between why are you going in that bad direction when we have this wonderful democracy to offer you? That's the Hillary Clinton version. And we know some changes need to be made, and we're working on it. Versus a Bernie Sanders, yeah, the system really is corrupt. Yes, you really don't have a lot of chances. Yes, it is rigged. Yeah, and even to go farther, if you believe that there really isn't pre-Trump a democracy, then it's pretty hard to make a case to people who are turning to something else.
Thank you, Liz. May I reflect a little bit back of that?
Sure.
So first thing, you were saying, hey, why just see a grain of truth? Why not try and understand more of where the person is coming from? Yeah, and I agree with you completely. I was just, the grain is the first step sometimes, yeah. And then you were saying, well, what this is not, I'm not reflecting your words exactly, but I think your meaning was, hey, it's not so simple. There's all different kinds of Democratic candidates. So it isn't just Republicans over here and Democrats over there. There's much more nuance and really big differences within each of the two parties. Is that close to what you were trying to say?
Yeah, I would say the end of it, though, that there are big differences. It's not just a general big differences. It's well, here's another sort of thing to throw in there. Um, you might be really upset and disgruntled, not just because you were bullied as a child, but because you're being bullied now at your job where you're
Yeah,
not
sure.
making enough to live on and
Sure.
not being treated well.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not, yeah, there was just something for me about the idea of the dialogue to change minds as opposed to there's real pain, that needs to be corrected, and fascism may not be the way to correct it unless you're one of the very few people who are the right color, who have the right connections. Fascism may work well for you in that case, but that's not true for most of us.
Yeah, yeah. So totally agree that, my example was very simplistic. I was just trying to illustrate where we might connect, but that there are many multiple reasons why people have voted the way that they did. And a lot of them have to do with real pain. Absolutely. Um, and when you were saying about fascism may not be the way to address that pain, one of my favorite book titles of all times, just about, is a book by Astra Taylor called Democracy May Not Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone. Because it really holds that polarity that you're talking about, right? Like there are many problems with the current system, as Bernie Sanders pointed out. And yet, taking a sledgehammer to it or a chainsaw or whatever it may be, may end up causing even more harm to a lot of people. So yeah, is that kind of in the ballpark of what you were speaking to?
Hmm. I just wonder if, saying that taking a sledgehammer to it may not work, but there may be many people who are going to have to feel the pain of that sledgehammer before they believe it. I just wonder how far words can go.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm not trying to change anyone's mind so much as what I was saying before, when people themselves are saying, "Oh my gosh,
Mm.
maybe I made a mistake." How do we receive them? How do we listen to them? How do we
Yeah.
not try and say, well, you got what you deserve or whatever, right? Because
I
that,
forgot about that part.
yeah, yeah, no,
Thanks.
yeah, thank you. So
Oh,
are
but
we?
you know what it is? Now I'm interrupting,
What?
Rosa.
Oh no, go for
I
it.
just got the felt sense. It's the certainty that we're right, I think, is what I'm having trouble with. We coming into it knowing we're right. I always get in the kind of, I always need to negate the null hypothesis kind of in my, but what if we're not somehow? I mean, there's always something about the knowing, the certainty, coming into it with certainty. It really did remind me of Jehovah's Witnesses ringing your doorbell on Sunday morning. There was a feeling of, you coming into it knowing you're right. So whose
Well,
mind really needs to
I
change?
don't know, Liz. I just need to say that if you are going to go put your life on the line, like so many nonviolent activists have done, right? If you're going to go block a nuclear bomb that is about to leave its silo, and I forget what the name of the person who did that was. Oh my gosh, she was I believe she was. But it's like if you're gonna there, I mean, Martin Luther King, I mean, Gandhi, etc. It's like there comes a point where your inner conviction leads you to take a stand on behalf of certain things. And I, I, I yeah, I mean, as a Black person in America, Dr. David Camp is convinced that he needs to give white people better tools for dealing with racism because he's feeling it all the time, right? So he's not going into the, is it real, is it not real? He's looking at how can we work with empathy and listening to help shift the situation that is causing so much pain to so many people. So you get to decide where that point is for you, right? Nobody else can decide
Well, I don't know. Now you're going into the individual, which is fine, but I'm kind of thinking more the philosophical. I'm always more interested, and like I keep going meta. I just go meta in this sense of what is it to know something? What is it to be convinced? What is it to, it's, my interest. That's
Yeah, yeah.
here's
And
my
I don't
mystery.
know. I have no idea what it is. I just know that whatever our convictions are, when we stand up for them in nonviolent ways, we have much, much, much better chances of making a difference because more people are willing to consider what we're saying. It's less easy to write it off than when we do it in a violent way. But I think you're pointing to something really important here, which is um, I would call it moral violence. Like, and so what is the distinction between saying this is the courage of my convictions and I'm acting on it versus saying I have the absolute truth and everybody else is wrong, so I have the right to have a attitude of disdain towards others. I don't think Gandhi had an attitude of disdain. I don't think King had an attitude of disdain. Those attitudes are super important, right? And so that's what Lynn was talking about before of like how do you work with the own inner attitude in you? And at the same time, I don't think we have to say, oh, I can't know anything. So, maybe Hitler is right. And I'm just gonna, not because maybe this is all just made up. Maybe it's made up that Americans landed on the moon. Maybe it's made up that this happened. It's like, I think that there's a radical not knowing which can be weaponized in a certain way, right? Where people feel afraid to trust or believe anything, right? And so there's like, how do we find that middle ground there where we have the courage of our own convictions, but um, without judging others and without assuming that we've arrived at the end point for all time. I mean, who knows? I may, change my mind about something later and we all do, right? So I do think it's really useful to think about ways that we've been wrong in the past. I mean, President Obama, who I love dearly, did a ton of drone strikes against other countries, and I was in Argentina, and a friend of my mom was saying, I don't understand why you all in the United States love President Obama as much as you do because he's been doing this nasty stuff. And it's like, well, it's hard to explain. He's very gracious and we've lived in a racist country and we kind of like him as a person. And it's also true. He did a heck of a lot of drone strikes, plus in addition, he really boosted up this whole meritocracy system that if we somehow support and partner with tech enough that everybody who is super smart will be able to find a way and we can't. Meritocracy doesn't work. We need to have solidarity, regardless of people's level of education. They deserve to have a decent life, right? There's a wonderful book by Thomas Frankel called Listen Liberal, right? Like we liberals, like we have to look at how do we ourselves contribute to the things that we don't then like, right? It's super important, right? So there are huge valid criticisms of how DEI has been done in this country. There's been a ton of shaming and blaming that have been a part of DEI. That doesn't mean that we need to do away with all DEI, but it's like it's nuanced. Yes, Lynn, your hand is up and we're over time and we need to go into groups. Sorry about that.
Yes,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to say before, I think this would be a nice time for us to, if it feels right to you in the groups, to look at some of the nuances of this. How can we be really behind our values and our convictions without assuming that we're right and the other person is wrong? And I think that focusing has given us a lot in this. We love what Jean Genlin says about in therapy, and I think that it's in all dialogue to put nothing between me and the other person, including values that I'd be willing to die for. I'm not going to put them between me and the other. And when we're in dialogue, there's a kind of sacred space And it's a sacred space in which I'm offering all of my assumptions and all of my deep convictions on the altar of the conversation. That's Gadamer, and I love that. We're putting them right there next to us. Not that we're losing them, not that we don't have them, but that we're putting them right there so that we can be with this living mystery of the other. And I think that this is not only in individuals, not only in therapy, but also it's a kind of a practice in groups. And that's one of the things that that I want to really promote, is this sense of being able to put nothing between us and the others. But it's a hairy question of the being firm about feeling that you're right about something and being able to put that aside in terms of this dialogue with the other.
Wonderful, Lynn. Thank you so much.
Is this a good time to go into our, we'll come back at 9:35. Welcome back. Masumi came an hour later because of, I said there's always one person at least.
Because that I didn't know the summer daylight saving had started already. I came in the ordinary time.
Hi, Sophie. So we're going to just wait for everybody to get back. Hi, welcome back, everybody. And we're going to read one of my very favorite poems.
Would you like me to do that now, the poem now?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Okay. This is a longer poem, but it's a very powerful poem. And I want to sustain my voice through it, so I might pause just a little.
I just want to say before you read that if you have comments or thoughts or that you didn't get to share, send them to us. So we would love any of your comments. So put them in an email. Okay.
Okay. It's a Langston Hughes poem. Let America be America again. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great, strong land of love, where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme, that any man be crushed by one above. It never was America to me. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark? And who are you that draws your veil across the stars? I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery's scars. I am the red man driven from the land.
I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. I am the young man full of strength and hope, tangled in that ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, of grab the land, of grab the gold, of grab the ways of satisfying need, of work the men, of take the pay, of owning everything for one's own greed. I am the farmer, bondsman to the soil. I am the worker, sold to the machine. I am the Negro, servant to you all. I am the people, humble, hungry, mean, hungry yet today despite the dream, beaten yet today, O pioneers. I am the man who never got ahead, the poorest worker battered through the years. Yet, I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream in the in the old world while still a serf of kings, who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true, that even yet its mighty daring sings in every brick and stone, in every furrow turned, that's made America the land it has become. Oh, I'm the man who sailed those early seas in search of what I meant to be my home. For I'm the one who left dark Ireland's shore and Poland's plain and England's grassy lea, and torn from black Africa's strand I came to build a homeland of the free. The free? Who said the free? Not me. Surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions shot down when we strike, the millions who have nothing for our pay, for all the dreams we've dreamed, and all the songs we've sung, and all the hopes we've held, and all the flags we've hung. The millions who have nothing for our pay, except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again. The land that never has yet been, and yet must be the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. From those who live like leeches on people's lives, we must take back our land again, America. Oh, yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we, the people, must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you all for this very brave stretch of our conversation today. I'll see you next week. Thank you, Rosa, so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.